Hey Planeswalkers, this is Eric from Monk Punk Magic bringing you another Commander video, and today I just want to talk about power levels real quick. But first, if you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button. I'm not getting paid for this, but seeing that people like my videos is a great inspiration for me to keep making more. So we're talking about power levels in Commander. Evaluating your deck's power level is important for fun and fair gameplay. This is especially true in Commander because the power levels in Commander can be very different. They are so different, in fact, that at one point it's like you're playing an entirely different game. So having a conversation before joining a new playgroup is as simple as saying, what kind of power levels are you guys playing with? And when having this discussion, it's really important to recognize what we mean when we say high power. So high power means it's just below CEDH. And CEDH is like insane power, like mega power, like phenomenal cosmic power. And high power is also that. It's just scooched back a little. So high power is like diet CEDH. This is partially the reason I'm making this video. If your deck falls into the high power category, you need to recognize that you are already out of the league of many players. And so I made this infographic to show you how I personally break down the power levels. Yes, I know, after seeing this, some of you already hate me, and you think I'm a terrible person just because we have different opinions, and that's fine. But just try to keep an open mind, okay? I'm not claiming to be an expert here, and a lot of this stuff has to do with opinions, but just forget all your preconceived notions and try to absorb what I'm saying. Now, I did not base these ratings on how mean a deck is. You can play a mean strategy like land destruction or discard and still have a powerful or low power deck. Also, I want to say up front that I do highly believe that budget does play a factor in determining your deck's power level. When you get into the realms of high power and CEDH, it is going to be extremely difficult to keep up with your opponents if you can't afford some of the more powerful cards. Now, people hate it when I say this, and I'm not entirely sure why, but for some reason many people take this conversation very personally. So what I want to say to those people is, first, I agree that there are some exceptions. Yes, you can build a CEDH budget version of Baral, Chief of Compliance, or Godo, Bandit Warlord, and maybe even a few others, but for the most part, in general, if you want to play high power or CEDH, you need to spend some money. Second, I'm not trying to say that cards being expensive is a bad thing. I mean, when we're talking about the most powerful cards, they're gonna be expensive. That's reality. There's nothing wrong with that. In high power and CEDH, you usually need expensive cards like Burgeoning, Exploration, Cyclonic Rift, Riftstic Study, Teferi's Protection, Sylvan Library, Ancient Tomb, Gemstone Caverns, Mana Vault, Force of Will, Mana Crypt, Yawgmoth's Will, Wheel of Fortune, and Mishra's Workshop. These are not specialized cards for specific decks. Many people consider these to be staples, right? These are just cards that in CEDH and high power, you just try to include these cards. But here's where I think people get confused. In paper, these cards are extra expensive, so it's actually rare to see them. And I think what creates the confusion is the fact that it's actually rare to see them in what people call CEDH games, so-called CEDH games. Lots of people miscalculate, thinking that they have a CEDH deck just because they have a couple of these cards, but in a real CEDH game, you try to run like all these cards, as many as you can. So if you only play in paper, you might not realize how powerful these cards actually are. When you start playing online and these cards become affordable, the entire game changes and the difference in power is actually completely insane. So please, before you bash me for saying that you usually need to spend money to play CEDH, try playing it online first, because that is the real deal. And just look at Ramp as a quick example. So with a Mana Crypt, a player can play Cultivate on turn 1, so they end up with 5 mana on turn 2. And if Gemstone Caverns is in their opening hand, they would end up with 6 mana on turn 2. And so what I want to make absolutely clear to you is this is a very common start to high-power CEDH games. And if your deck is not able to consistently ramp in this way, you are probably going to get steamrolled. And if you don't believe me, check out the YouTube channel Playing with Power MTG and you'll see what I mean. No one on that channel is playing with a budget deck, and again, there's nothing wrong with that. It just goes with the territory. And yes, there are exceptions like Baral and Godo that can work on a budget, but the exceptions are few, and I don't believe they can actually be all the way up to power level 10. They can beat decks that are power level 10, but I feel like the most these decks can be on a budget is power level 9. Like Mono Red and Mono Blue, what Mono Red, Mono Blue deck in existence would not benefit from running Mishra's Workshop? These colors rely heavily on artifacts, and for any deck that relies on artifacts, Mishra's Workshop is absolutely game-changing. I just don't believe you could truly say Baral or Godo deck is level 10 without including it. The last thing I want to say before going over individual power levels is that they're not indicative of whether or not a deck has an ultimate combo. Ultimate combos are only one way to win the game, and there are even CEDH decks that don't have ultimate combos. However, the higher in power a deck is, the more the theme overall will become to win the game. So even though levels 7 and 8 are considered to be in the realm of what we call casual commander, they still have been built in a way that focuses on their controller winning the game. So for example, a power level 6 deck might have the goal of making a bunch of creature tokens, while a power level 7 deck would be more geared toward winning the game with those creature tokens. Alright, so power level 1, this is just unplayable, right? So an example might be a deck that has 5 lands and every spell is converted mana cost 6. Like no players actually own a power level 1 deck. We are just using it as a base, a reference from which we can build the other power levels. So power level 1 is just completely unplayable even if you're trying. Power level 2 is mostly unplayable. So an example would be a deck with 35 lands, but all of the good spells are CMC 6, and all the other spells have no specific purpose. You know, power level 2 deck is just something you threw together with cards that you weren't even looking at. Again, this is a power level that almost no one actually plays. Power level 3 is a deck that can function, but it is not built correctly. It is not built in a way that allows us to ever win the game. Again, this might be a deck that you just threw together, but it ended up being slightly more powerful than level 2. Otherwise, no one would actually build a power level 3 deck. So these first 3 levels are all just bad, and pretty much serve as a reference with which we can compare other decks. So power level 4 is where we start getting into decks that you might actually see at a commander table. This is the power level I call jank. And I don't mean slightly jank, I mean total jank. In other words, it's a theme that has nothing to do with the actual game. For example, making a deck where every creature has a hat, or where every card starts with the letter C. Or in my own experience, I made a deck themed around getting drunk and partying with Olivia Valderin as the commander. You can click the link above if you want to see that deck tech. So jank decks can actually win the game, but normally it's just the result of being the last one standing, winning by default, as it were. Jank decks are not powerful, but they are extremely fun to build, and I feel like every true commander player has to build at least one. So you will see in the graphic that the number 4 is partially red because, by its nature, jank is just kind of bad. Even an optimized jank deck is still jank, as they rarely contain a win condition that fits their jank theme. And that's fine. The goal of the jank deck is not to win, it's just to do the janky thing. Next we got power level 5, which is what I call pre-constructed power. So this is the type of deck that you would get from a commander precon, aka the pre-made commander decks you buy at the store. However, the precons do vary in power, but in general, I would say they fall into this category. So power level 5 is a deck that has a solid theme, It has a way it can win the game, and it has all the elements a deck needs, such as ramp, removal, and card draw, but it also has cards that do not fit the theme, and most of the cards could be easily replaced with better ones. So in other words, a power level 5 deck is not optimized. Another example would be like a tester deck, right? One you just built for the first time and you're playing it for the first time, trying it out to see how it works before you make the final adjustments. So to summarize, level 5 decks, they have a theme, they have pieces that they need, but they are not optimized. To use a metaphor, it's like the rough draft of deck building. So power level 6 would be slightly optimized. To continue with the metaphor, a level 6 deck is like your second draft of your level 5 deck. This is what was a level 5 deck, but then has been optimized to some extent, right? But it still contains cards that could easily be replaced, and maybe some cards that don't fit the theme. So power levels 4, 5, and 6 are what I would call low power. And this is not an indication of their exact strategy, but theirs is certainly not the cutthroat, doing whatever it takes to win as soon as possible strategy. Furthermore, this also is not an indication of whether or not they run ultimate combos. Lower power decks can run ultimate combos, but their combos usually require multiple pieces, they're easily disrupted, and 99% of games it will take them at least 5 turns to get all the pieces out. So now we're getting into the level of high power. So level 7 is an optimized casual strategy, but in a budget. Again, sorry for offending anyone who thinks power levels are not indicative of budget. I just disagree. There is a difference when you play with the most powerful cards, and reality check, the most powerful cards are more expensive. So anyway, I think a power level 7 deck can include some expensive cards, it just doesn't have as many as it could. Also, a power level 7 deck still has a casual strategy. It still plays by the casual social contract. Sure, the goal is still to win the game, but it's not to win by any means necessary. I hate to put an exact definition on it, but for the purpose of this video, in my personal opinion, a casual win condition is one that can be achieved around turn 5, but almost never is. A good example of a level 7 deck would be my Archangel Avacyn combo deck. The combo is with cards like Brash Taunter and Guilty Conscience. It's an infinite combo that I can actually pull off as early as turn 5, but that would require that I have like the perfect hand. And in Boros colors, the tutors are just not that good. So even though my Avacyn deck does win a lot of games, it still takes me a while to set up the combo and protect it to make sure it doesn't just get countered. So in level 8, we still have a casual strategy to win the game, but now there are no budget restrictions, and the gameplay is a bit more cutthroat. So if I took my Archangel Avacyn deck and just completely packed it with the most powerful cards, the highest power it could be is still just an 8, because the main strategy is still casual in that I'm not just doing whatever it takes to win. I'm doing whatever it takes to make this specific combo happen, and then win. And even though the strategy is casual, I'm still going to do whatever it takes to make it happen, and so this is where players start getting more cutthroat, or in other words, they start playing in a more unsympathetic manner. They stop taking pity on you, they just decide they're going to kill you as soon as possible. Power level 8 is the borderline to CEDH. The only real difference is the strategy. Power level 8 has a casual strategy to win the game, it's just not looking to win in the fastest way imaginable. The realm of high power is where we sometimes run into trouble because a high power deck will still run expensive cards, and there's nothing wrong with that, but if your opponents are playing with power levels 4 or 5, that's when it becomes unfair. In my experience, power levels 4 and 5 will find it almost impossible to keep up with power levels 7 and 8 because there is just that much of a difference. This difference is why lower power players will often accuse the higher power player of playing a CEDH deck. In reality, the lower power players don't realize that CEDH is just even more powerful. But the difference in power is still enough to where the higher power player might as well be playing a CEDH deck. That is why on my graphic, power level 8 is colored slightly blue. It includes cards that you often see in CEDH, and those are cards that many consider to be competitive all in themselves. Personally, my preference is keeping decks at power level 7. To me, power level 7 is the sweet spot for fun and fair gameplay. But again, I have nothing against power level 8 or CEDH, but I'm just not interested in that style of cutthroat gameplay. So talking about CEDH, we have power levels 9 and 10, and they are not very different. They are both completely optimized with no budget restrictions, and their strategy is nothing more than to win the game by any means necessary. To me, the only difference between power levels 9 and 10 is the win rates. A power level 10 deck is built in the same way as power level 9, it just happens to win the game more often. Even though these decks can win as early as turn 1, normally they do not because their opponents are smart enough to have answers. So how early a CEDH deck wins is not as indicative of power level as how often it wins. And that's it. That's my take on power levels in Commander. I hope this information has been helpful to you, and I hope it leads to more fun and fair gameplay. If you like this video, hey, please hit that like button, I really appreciate it. This is Eric from Monk Punk Magic signing off. Until next time, take care, take it easy.